Hi, I'm Phil Craig.
And I'm Andrew Loney.
And together we aim to bring you the most scandalous stories and some of the most scandalous people in history. So thanks for joining us here on the Scandalmongers podcast. We are back.
We are, and we're back twice a week.
We're back twice a week. This is our first Wednesday for a while. So happy Wednesday to everybody. Oh, also, I have a new toy. I don't know whether it makes a difference. Look, I'm practicing. Can you hear anything different? I've had a lot of criticism for my sound quality, so I'm hoping that this will improve things. There you go.
We'd love to know your reaction to Phil's new toy. But we're excited because everyone wanted Shauna to come on the program, and she's finally here.
Yep, in a minute we're going to be going live to Brisbane, Australia to speak to Shauna, which will be really interesting and different, and we hope entertaining. But we have to talk about last week's episode. We had a vintage, I think our second highest ever list of comments, a vintage list of praise and a certain amount of criticism and some mockery.
And it's always the case when we do Harry and Meghan. I mean, people clearly have very strong views, and it's very hard to shift the dial, I think, on people's views. We try to present two very different points of view and sort of probe them, but people, I think, have made up their minds about Harry and Meghan.
Yes, well, I'm not sure that everybody got to die. There's quite a few people said I gave up after 10 minutes, which is a shame because there was a really interesting mix of opinions, I think, in that last episode. If you've not tried it, please do. But there's also quite funny comments. At one point, Andrew said we should have our own jam since Meghan is selling jam. And maybe the Scandalmongers should sell some jam. So Nick Greetham immediately said, I recommend plum-flavoured for Andrew for his plummy voice.
Right.
See, I'm not the only person who laughs at you for being posh. And for Phil, raspberry, because he likes to give a raspberry to the establishment, apparently.
Right. Well, I tried my best.
I think you do, actually.
We could have something quite tart, and we could have a sort of marmalade.
Oh, yes, actually, that'd be nice. Rather astringent, definitely. So, yeah, we were told.
Jam do you think we are?
Yes,
We'd love to hear from you.
Let us know the flavours of jam you would like us to make. We'll see what we can do. So, Catherine L. said we're wrong to talk about the success of the Nigeria tour because, as she put it rather well, I thought, she said, notoriety isn't stardom. Interesting comment.
Gosh. Well, there was a lot of very favourable comment in the press about it.
Yeah, we weren't the only people who noticed it was a success by some standards. Brian Pollard wasn't impressed. What really is sad is watching three reasonably intelligent men fawning over Meghan.
Well, I've never been accused of fawning over Meghan, so thank you.
I've never been accused of being reasonably intelligent. So I was pleased with that. Thank you, Brian. Keep watching, please. Oh, lots of people. I love this one from Laura Dawson. She said, I'm one of those rare fans of your podcast who is quite sympathetic to Meghan and Harry. And I enjoyed your program. And don't forget, please, that she's accused of sort of making money out of being royal, but doesn't Charles sell jam? Didn't Fergie trade off her titles? And didn't Peter Phillips do adverts in China? Then again, I'm an American from New York, and any pearls I might clutch are certainly put away in a drawer. So that was good. And then one more, indulge me, Andrew. One more. Rachel Clinic just wrote about how much she enjoyed the episode and the series and pointed out that for anybody who doesn't like doing their exercises, we're quite good company. So
right.
She listens to us on our exercise.
Either get fit, or you can listen to us.
Yeah, somebody said that we're quite good fun when you're ironing. Who irons anymore these days? But yes, she's binging away while she's on her exercise bike, which she hates, but we make it a little bit less unpleasant.
Right. So, gosh. Well, we fulfill some sort of social need.
Well, I'll tell you what else happened this week, which is maybe in the greater scheme of things, rather more important than Meghan and Harry. The blood scandal, which we covered a few weeks ago with a really very powerful interview with Jason Evans, which I recommend to you. That came to a climax, didn't it, in the House of Commons?
and a pretty searing report about basically government cover-ups, which is very much the theme of the podcast. I'm afraid I suspect nothing much will change, but I think it puts the post office scandal in the shade. Just the number of people who died, the period. I think we should return to it. So, there are a lot of recent books on the subject, and it's clearly a
Yeah,
huge.
and it crosses so many different governments. It's
Yeah,
30 or 40 years. And some of the ministers have been coming forward. I mean, Andy Burnham, the Labour Minister for Health, 15 years ago, has said, I think we mentioned this in our podcast on it, he said he's sorry because he was basically misinformed by the civil servants. And I think this is the ministers not very curious, civil servants very, very keen to cover up. This means decades of misery for these people who suffered so badly.
yeah. Yes, no, I recommend that, the podcast that we did do it. And actually there's another story in the news, the existence of concentration camps on a British island, Alderney. A report has come out, in fact, literally this morning. And we'll be talking to Martin Bright, who's been covering the story for a long time. So I'm looking forward to discussing that.
Yeah, lots of varied things coming up. We have that story. We're talking to Anna Corsi again later today, which we're looking forward to. She was so popular when she came on and spoke about Tony Snowden, and she's definitely
It's
our
very
oldest
much Laura Thompson territory. It's a
Yeah.
story of Lord Curzon's three daughters. So it's a bit like it's a group biography. She's very much again within our territory of writing about privileged rich people who
Yeah,
enjoy.
so I think we may have a few newcomers today who are interested in Shauna, and of course Shauna is interested in books. And we have had some great writers. Do check out our back catalogue, and we have more great writers to come. What else? Oh, we got told off by our producer, Andrew. We don't mention enough the podcaster's famous kind of litany of requests. Please like, please subscribe. It does make a difference. If you enjoy the show, please like it. I think last week we had some down votes. So I noticed at one point there were 500 likes, and then there were 420. Oh dear. But so please like, please subscribe. And if you're feeling generous, we have a thank you button, which will help us cover our costs, buy more microphones, and make better programs.
Yeah, we still aren't covering our costs on this, so any contributions are very welcome. And of course, suggestions of who you'd like to have on. We're still trying to find a European royal expert to talk about the Spanish royal family, but we haven't had any luck there so far. So any suggestions always welcome.
Yeah, we had a few nice emails on that subject, and we are chasing people.
Yeah.
And thank you for that. All right, I think the parish notices are over. Shall we go to Australia?
Let's go to Brisbane.
Here we go.
Well, we're delighted to welcome this week Shauna Kay, who's a very successful podcaster in Australia and a fellow royal, I suppose, you're a fan, you're a critic in some ways, and it's really nice to have this opportunity to talk to you. And I think you want to talk to us.
I do, and it's such a thrill to be here because I'm a fan of both Phil and Andrew, and of course, just the Scandalmongers podcast. I love it, so this is really exciting.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's kind of late for you in Australia, kind of early for us in London. Although
yeah.
I met Andrew yesterday, and he told me that before lunch he'd written 5,000 words of his book. So I felt very inadequate all day.
Good.
That's amazing. And I believe, Phil, that you've done your first draft
I've done my
of your
first
book.
draft of my book about the 1945, which I'm very excited about. And maybe if you like us at the end of this interview, you might think about reviewing it in a year's time.
Oh, I would love to. As long as you come on the Vintage Read Show.
Anybody who knows me knows that at the drop of a hat, I fly to Australia because I spent so much time there. So I could be a live studio guest if you like.
He could be your stalker.
Well, that's a bit of a problem because my studio is in my bedroom.
Okay, well, let's rewind the conversation. Sorry. No, we actually heard about you through Andrew Gold. And the minute we mentioned you for like a single sentence in one of our shows, and we don't get a big audience like you, to be honest, but we had hundreds of people in the comments saying, "Oh, Shauna, yes, you must talk to Shauna." So that led us to this moment.
Yes, that was a little bit embarrassing, actually, because I didn't want you to think I'd actually sent them there.
No, it was clearly a lot of crossover between all our listeners. I'm
Well,
intrigued.
because I haven't. I'll send them to this one, though.
Yeah, good.
I actually think, without being too sort of self-congratulatory, although I do love a mutual appreciation society, it has to be said, I think we operate in a similar sort of space. I think there is a sort of, what I love about your show is you're very respectful to your guests. You let them talk. You can disagree without getting angry. That's something we really believe in. And I think also generally we're a bit, I wouldn't say anti-woke, but we're woke skeptical, put it that way.
Yeah. I think I've become more woke skeptical since I've been on YouTube, funnily enough. I think I was a bit of a raging lefty in my youth. But, I think things like free speech and being able to express your opinions mean so much when you're doing a podcast on YouTube. So I think you would be aware of it because you're a broadcaster journalist, so you would have always been aware of it. But I think I've become more aware about the importance of being able to say what you think without fear or favor, as long as you say, like, you're respectful and you present a, cohesive argument, it's not just abusive. But it's become more important to me. So I think I'm getting more right as I get older.
Well, I suspect we all drift a little bit in that direction, except Andrew, who is the exception to all rules, who's become a kind of thorn in the side of the establishment. And it's probably on some kind of list now.
Yes.
Oh, I know. Now you're getting officially monitored, Andrew. What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, I mean, they're probably listening to this podcast. That will push up viewing figures.
Really?
So yeah, no, they just monitor everything I do, everything I write, things I appear at, even correspondence connected with, for example, applications for jobs, court cases, everything.
Wow. And when you say they, who are we talking about?
Well, I mean, the Cabinet Office are the ones that I've got information from, but I've got a what we call subject access request, which is claims your personal data from the Foreign Office, and they've kept that into touch now for over 6 months, because again, I suspect they have so much material they don't want to show it. So they're all doing it. I mean, when they should be getting on with running the country.
Does that make you feel really intimidated?
No, it just makes me annoyed and
Right.
more determined than ever to try and root out the sort of corruption I think that's at the heart of government, and this suppression of trying to challenge, anything which doesn't fit in with the conventional narrative. But that's what you do.
Yeah,
You made your
I try
reputation
to. Yeah,
being skeptical of Spare. I mean, I'm fascinated to learn about the inconsistencies in the Meghan and Harry story, which is, of course, continuing to run as we speak.
Well, I don't know about you, Andrew, but I think that sometimes it's the little stories and the little inconsistencies that sort of grab your attention, because you expect about the big scandals or the big things, you expect people to lie. So you're sort of watching for that. But when there's little inconsistencies, that sort of, where seemingly about things that they wouldn't need to lie about, that sort of gets your attention. And you think,
Yeah.
why are they bothering? And I've got a bit of a scandal for you on Scandalmongers.
Great.
And so buckle up. This is, a world exclusive about Meghan Markle's little dogs. Now, it has been referred to in a lot of books, and a lot of royal biographers have actually referenced this, but they haven't taken it quite as far. Now, I will be very careful to use qualifying language so you don't get sued. I'm not any big assertions, but it's quite a fun little story. So do you want to hear it?
Of course.
Okay, well, on the 24th of December 2017, the Daily Mail actually did a story about Meghan Markle's little rescue beagle. And they were saying that it had got injured in the UK, and that it had got injured soon after Clarence House's announcement about their engagement, about Harry and Meghan's engagement, which was on the 27th of November 2017. And they said that in the month after this injury, that he was being treated by a very well-known vet in the UK, Noel Fitzpatrick. Well, that's all very fine, but we later found out in Harry's Spare, where he said that this little dog was actually injured in Canada prior to Meghan coming to the UK. So that sort of raised my eyebrows a little bit and raised other people's eyebrows a little bit. But then it was even more fascinating. In their Netflix docuseries, they actually had a selfie of Harry and Meghan on their engagement night and this little dog with plaster casts on both its front legs. And that was actually allegedly taken in the first week of November, because that's when Clarence House also confirmed that's when the proposal took place. So we've got this inconsistency with timelines, and seemingly it doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, not a big deal. But at the end of that actual newspaper article, it was said that Meghan Markle was distraught because she had to leave behind her other dog, Bogart, in Canada because he was too old to fly. Now, this is where the royal biographer, Sally Bedell-Smith, actually comes in, because she did a story on Bogart. And the reason why she was interested in it was because her son, who's a scriptwriter, actually adopted Bogart's brother from the same LA rescue shelter that Meghan adopted Bogart from. So Sally Bedell-Smith sort of felt like she was, the dog's grandmother, so she had an interest. But she pointed out rather cheekily that Bogart wasn't too old to fly, as it was stated as the excuse of why Meghan didn't bring him over. And she included a photograph of her son's dog flying to a film set, because he's a screenwriter, at 5 years old. So she made a point in this article, well, look, he's not too old to fly. Whereupon sources for Harry and Meghan came out with another story saying, well, it's because there's not enough room for Bogart in Notcott. The grounds of Notcott are too small. We couldn't possibly have such a large dog as Bogart over at Notcott. Well, Harry and Meghan sort of mucked that excuse up themselves, because they went ahead and adopted a black Labrador that was as big as Bogart and possibly could even end up bigger than Bogart. So that sort of blew that excuse out of the water. And Sally Bedell-Smith, again, did another article. She did an article in the Sunday Times. She did an article in Vanity Fair, and she did numerous sort of blog entries on her Substack. So I could tell that something was really annoying her about this story. It really annoyed her that Bogart was left behind. And pardon the pun, but she was like a dog with a bone. She just wouldn't let this story go. So then we'll fast forward to Harry and Meghan going to Canada for Christmas. And it was that time where they were supposedly going to go for 5 or 6 weeks, but all journalists everywhere knew they were planning to leave the UK, because they took this little rescue dog with them, and also Pooler, the black Labrador. And that sort of gave journalists the heads up, oh no, they're not planning to come back, because they went through all the effort to take the dogs for just 5 or 6 weeks. It didn't make sense. Now, when they were there in Canada, Sally Bedell-Smith again comes out with another article saying, oh, I do hope Meghan Markle's going to see Bogart while she's in Canada. And then she reiterates the whole story again. Then we'll fast forward to the Freedom Flight. You've got Harry and Meghan flying off to LA, Melodrama Cito. And this is when she actually says something quite telling. It was a little throwaway line, but it was like, oh dear, I hope Harry doesn't meet the same fate as Bogart. And it was said in a sort of a jovial way, a jokey way. But I was following this story, and I thought, well, all the royal books have sort of made out that Meghan Markle had an agenda to meet up with Harry. That some sort of implied it was like professional networking. Other people, like Tom Bower, more or less laid out, almost very contrived effort to place herself in his immediate circle and enable, to meet him, to enable that. So I thought, okay, it might be fun to see if Meghan was thinking about having some sort of relationship with a royal biographer by adopting this dog. And I knew it was far-fetched, but I thought if I can make a connection between Trevor Engelson, her then husband, and Meghan, and David Branson Smith, who's Sally's son, that I might have something here. This could have been what motivated Meghan to adopt this dog. So that's what I went looking for. Now, there's two things in its favor, and I did find a link. One of them was that Sally Bedell Smith was actually featured very heavily in USA media right at the time where Meghan adopted Bogart. So she was very much, because she just released her book, Queen Elizabeth II. So she was everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And she was getting interviewed by UK media, USA media. But I still had to find the connection for Meghan to have heard about the dogs and heard about that David Branson Smith adopted the other dog. Well, I found it, and it was Max Winkler. Now, you know, Vonzi of Happy Days, you know, hey, Happy Days. Well, his son is a director. And he was actually working on a film at the time with David Branson Smith, Sally's son, who is a screenwriter. And the connection that I got to Trevor Engelson was they both went to University of Southern California to the Cinematic Arts School. So they knew each other. Then I found out that Max Winkler actually told David about these two little 6-week-old puppies that were at this LA rescue. And now I can't prove this, but I'm surmising that maybe he may have told Trevor Engelson too, because he told David, he told Trevor Engelson. Meghan hot-footed it to the rescue shelter the next day and actually adopted this puppy. Now, Lady Colin Campbell says in her book, and also Andrew Morton in her, and also Tina Brown in Palace Papers, they think the motivation was to put herself in the gaze of Ellen DeGeneres, you know, the talk show host. And so because Meghan went on Instagram and sort of said, oh, thank you, Ellen, for encouraging me to adopt this dog. And so they assumed that that was the motivation. But I think it was the Sally Bedell Smith connection. And I think that's why Sally is so furious about all this and keeps writing articles about it and keeps trying to alert people to the sort of person that Meghan Markle is.
No, it's a sly up. It was a move to get herself, through a charming little puppy, into the orbit of Harry. Sounds like the opening of a rom-com.
Two
well,
questions.
I think she's also did. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
She sort of made moves 2012, 2013 to sort of get herself sort of in the orbit. But it wasn't until 2014 where she really got in on the periphery. But yeah, go Andrew.
How do you think Sally Bedell Smith could have helped her? And have you talked to her? And have you actually suggested she come on the show?
No, because I'm actually sharing this for the first time on your program. But it would be interesting to see if there's anything to this or whether it's just, you know, far-fetched. But I just have this gut feeling that it might have been the first move Meghan made. And it's also interesting because when they adopted this dog, Meghan had just come back from marrying Trevor in Jamaica. Now, the interesting thing is the wedding dress that she wore was an exact sort of replica of the dress that Catherine wore for her nighttime wedding reception. You know how Catherine got changed and she went to a nighttime wedding reception. She had a white dress with a sort of sparkly silver band around the middle. Well, that was what Meghan had just got married in. I'm just wondering whether this is a bit of a bunny boiler story, whether there is actual intention to this. And so that, for a bit of fun, was what I was trying to discover. Gosh. And sure enough, Meghan did contact David, Sally's son, and they met up once and they had a lovely time. And of course, Meghan, you know, portrayed it all on Instagram. And but she never contacted him again because she broke up with Trevor soon after that and took Bogart with her to Canada. So that was the last they heard. But I do think that, I mean, even up to as late as 2023, Sally did another article on this. So she's not letting it go. She's not making the same accusations I'm making, I'm not making accusations. I'm bringing up the idea that could have been the motivation. Yeah.
Gosh.
So I
But I mean,
just
you
find it
talk
interesting.
to Andrew Gold about people telling lies. 5%, I think he said, tell lies.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but why is Meghan telling all these lies? I've got the same thing with Prince Andrew in that interview at Newsnight. He says several things which are easily disproved, which do nothing to support his story, but only expose him as someone who can't be trusted. And Meghan seems to have the same sort of narcissistic sort of personality.
I think it's to do with gaslighting and throwing people off the scent. Because if you're constantly changing the narrative and the narrative can never stick, even on little things, it can tend to make the people investigating them or questioning look a little bit batty, because you can't find something to hook onto. And the narrative's always shifting and minor things. And so you double down on these minor things and you can look a little bit extreme. I really think it's a form of gaslighting.
Really, but don't
To
they
put
look
people.
shifty by not telling the truth, by being exposed for someone who doesn't tell the truth? That undermines their credibility.
And yet, isn't it funny that the people that tend to do this the most, that are obviously lying, they seem to get away with it. They seem to have that sort of Teflon thing
Confidence.
where they get, and it could just be because people are too polite. I mean, I don't imagine that you would be too polite, Andrew. I'm sure you would challenge it, but in a polite way. But I think that maybe people are sort of embarrassed to call people out to their face. I'm not sure.
Gosh, 'cause, I mean, you found a lot of inconsistencies, didn't you, in Spare? I mean, a lot of things that
Yes.
you think that even just a proofreader would check against, the stuff that was in the papers.
Yes,
The doc.
extraordinary things, really, like him denying that he was taking drugs to, I've forgotten his name, sorry. He was the man that actually turned up for the Invictus Games for Harry. Can you tell me his name? It's gone blank. I've gone blank. Marco.
Right.
And he was his trusted sort of second dad, although Harry's had a lot of second dads lately, but, he was trusted. And he turned up at Eton and sort of challenged Harry about his drug use and said, look, just tell me the truth. The best thing you can do is just tell me the truth and then we'll deal with it. And he looked at him right in the face and said, no, I'm not taking any drugs. Whereupon 40 pages later in his own memoir, he's sitting on the toilet, straddling the toilet, smoking a joint, staring out at a fox out the window. And I just thought it was extraordinary because it was like in his own memoir, there's only 40 pages between the denial, which he was doubling down on even in his own book, and then an example of actually smoking drugs 40 pages later. And I made a joke in my video about it. Well, look, Harry, I would have given it at least, 60 pages and hope people wouldn't have noticed the inconsistency. But there's, and all the things about the birth story and everything. I never relied on photographs or anything about the birth story because I was sort of always of the opinion that that was the realm of the conspiracy theorists or that they'd been altered or, doctored in some way. So I never went near any photographs or anything. And it's only been in the last maybe few months I felt confident enough to sort of look at Spare and say, well, look, this birth story is quite ludicrous. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. He's said that they turned up and only had 2 hours at the hospital, and the travel time each way to that hospital is 45 minutes. So it must have been a really quick birth. I mean, that's just crazy.
The question
So
of
what do you make of
these inconsistent stories, which can be picked apart and yet still work? And the perfect example of this is the racial allegations, which is the single biggest thing anybody now knows and will ever know about these two. And
Yes.
It's been very well documented, and lots of people on our show have talked about it. I'm sure the same is true of you, that everything they've said about this is inconsistent. Even within the Oprah interview, Harry says it was happened before
He debunks it himself.
Engaged, and then so there's no clear line. There's never been a clear line of, on this day, on that day, this person said, and it was only sort of sneaked out second or third hand that it might have been that it might have been Catherine and Charles, which is incredibly powerful and damaging to the official royal family, if you like. But it's worked, even though many people can see it's a little bit dodgy. It's become part of their package, and without that, there wouldn't have been Nigeria. There really
Although
wouldn't.
true,
And it's
true,
working so well
yeah,
for her. And I'm the biggest defender
yeah,
of Meghan on this podcast. But if you look at what happened in Nigeria, she's become this hybrid royal, this post-racial royal, the sort of global mega celebrity that can represent the whole world, not the old-fashioned
yes,
racist kind of colonial world. It's like royalty
yeah,
2.0. And whether you like it or not, I think that was an incredible success for her after a very bad year of being kicked by the US media.
Well, she's created a new narrative, and that's what they
Totally.
do.
She totally has.
Yeah, I think, though, it has backfired for Harry more than Meghan in that, that interview he did with Tom Bradby, and he denied that Meghan had ever implied that the royal family was racist. And and I think that was when a lot of people that were holding out still with support for Harry and with feeling sympathetic and feeling like he was being manipulated into this position. I think that was when people started to feel contempt for Harry. And I think that's when they thought, no, there's no way you're coming back. We're not going to accept you back. Because if you're going to make an accusation like that, I think people will have grudging respect for you if you stick to your guns, produce your evidence, don't backtrack. But I think if you sort of try to, worm your way out of it and mealy mouth your way out of it and then sort of gaslight.
It's about creating an impression. And the perfect example of that was the Netflix series, which didn't actually include that allegation about the royals being racist, but by smoke and mirrors, and I'm a TV director.
Or in Spare.
They cut together montages. They took a little line from one newspaper, a mad person on the bus shouting abuse at somebody, and they kind of created a sort of impression that they escaped from this kind of racist, xenophobic hellhole that is modern Britain. And it is really quite unfair.
And a lot of the examples they used in that docuseries weren't even sourced in the UK. A lot were USA tabloids. And, a lot of it was very false.
I'm known for being more sympathetic to Harry and Meghan than perhaps Andrew is, but that series was just, Leni Reichenstahl would have been proud of the emotional manipulation in that show.
Did the Australian media call it out? Sorry, did the Australian media call out some of this stuff? I mean, what's the response to Meghan and Harry there?
Very much similar to the UK. They're sort of an object of fun and mocking. On morning programs, they're just laughed at a lot of the time. I mean, there will be an element of people that, believe everything they say and believe what they're trying to spin. But I think, look, I really think people can see it now. They can sort of see that it was a bit of a cynical exercise and that she was sort of doubling down on the unconscious bias sort of race sort of thing. Hello.
Hello, Shauna.
Hi, Shauna.
Hello. No, I love you,
Shauna a mug.
Well, Francis is the librarian the sort of manager of a local library who's produced some of our best interviewees. So,
I bet.
Yeah, she's really good. Yes,
you actually filled the book about the Roman, the last episode.
Sorry,
the last episode you actually introduced Phil to the Roman book, Emma's book.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that so much. Yeah, we have quite a few authors come to the
Laura
library.
Came to the library as well.
We've got Mary Lawson this week, but she's a Canadian fiction writer.
She's not scandalous enough for us.
She's not scandalous enough. I'm very.
We'll have to get Shauna to Putney when you come across.
Oh gosh, that'd be fabulous. I'd chat to you all day.
It'd be wonderful. Enjoy the podcast.
Oh, thanks for the cameo.
Thank you.
Actually, Shauna, I wanted to bring you back to the birth story because, I mean, Lady Colin Campbell makes various insinuations in her book about the birth story. It's a big thing on social media. It's not been addressed by the press. What is the truth about the birth? I mean, as you say, they're only there briefly. I mean, did she give birth to these children or did someone else?
Well, just all the things point to, there's two ways you could look at it. You could say that Harry wanted to retain his privacy, Meghan's privacy, so he had no intention of putting the real birth story in his memoir. And so what is there is just a concocted sort of, reference to it, but it's not truthful because he wanted to keep it private. Well, that's reasonable, I would imagine. But if that's the case, if you wanted to keep things like that private, you would just leave it out. So you wouldn't bother putting it in, or you would reference it and say, well, look, I don't want to give the details of that because it's very special to us or whatever. So he does put it in there. And there's all these crazy, I've been contacted by so many nurses and doctors saying that this is insane, that there's no way she could have had an epidural, to give birth. And particularly she had a top up and then walk out of the hospital so soon after supposedly giving birth. So I looked in also the story about the gas, the laughing gas in the hospital. So many nurses have contacted me and saying there's no way that Harry would have been able to access laughing gas from, the hospital. He said it was canisters for a start. It's sort of piped through a wall. There's no way he could even turn it on without a nurse's help. And if that happened, all the medical professionals I've spoken to have said, well, look, he would have been thrown out. He would have been thrown out at that point for stealing, laughing gas, because it's very, very dangerous. The hospital would be liable, and there's no way, prince or not, he would have got away with it. So all those things in the book, I think, are enough to sort of raise enough questions. I went looking into it, and there's a surrogacy clinic that is sort of attached to Portland Hospital. And they weren't attached at the time of Archie's birth. And I got all excited when I discovered this because I thought, I've got it. I'm going to be world famous. I've got the proof that it was a surrogate birth. But they weren't attached formally to Portland Hospital at the time.
No, Shauna. I mean, the bigger the conspiracy, the less likely it is. We talked about Diana's murder, so supposed murder, which I think is nonsense. I just would find this so implausible. And the photographs banded about. I've never seen a photograph.
But can you explain, Phil, the book? Yeah. Can you explain the discrepancies in his book? What's he on about?
It's not sufficient to say, I don't believe it. You've got to provide more evidence. Sean has provided the evidence.
I think the onus is on the people alleging the conspiracy to produce the surrogate mother, the medical documents. All I see is photographs which could be explained by wind blowing her dress.
But the point Sean has made is it doesn't ring true, the story they've given in Spare. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but why did they invent the story for Spare?
It's fun to talk about.
I actually agree with you, Phil, about the photograph, because that has actually been debunked. And that's why I never relied on any photographs. And actually, I'm not even saying that definitively that this happened, but I'm just saying, wouldn't you think that journalists would cover this story? That they would at least address the questions raised and would talk to medical professionals and would sort of investigate, well, there seems to be some strange things, some strange allegations, even from that viewpoint. So let's debunk these. Let's do a deep dive in a story and investigate this. And also medical professionals that supposedly attended to Meghan unavailable. No one can get hold of them. They've sort of, all of a sudden gone off on a sabbatical. And also other things, I guess it's the lack of investigation. It makes people wonder why so gloves off? What's going on? I mean, there's been enough questions raised. Isn't it worth, looking at, rather than just dismissing it as, oh, yes, there are a lot of inconsistencies, but we won't look at them.
My guess, for what it's worth, and I could be wrong, there are enough newspapers in Britain who are very anti-Harry and Meghan. The Daily Mail, I think, generally is, not always. Certainly, I think the Sun is. They have investigative journalists by the score. They will have looked at this, I'm pretty sure of it. And if they haven't really dug into it, it's probably because they think it's also implausible. I mean, I'm not. It's called the Scandalmongers. I love talking about it.
I'm not attached to it.
You can look at the story and then dismiss it. But the fact that no one's looking at it is.
How do you know they haven't looked at it, Andrew? They may have looked at it and decided not to publish.
But it's still a good story. It's still a good story.
They did look at it pre-Spare, Phil. Pre-Spare, they looked at it. They dismissed it as conspiracy theories. But then again, you could be right. It could be Harry actually deliberately trying to stir the pot. And that's a good point that Lady Colin Campbell makes, that even if you don't believe it, which a lot, wouldn't, because it would seem too far-fetched. She makes a really good point that even if it's not true, seems to be that Meghan's trying to sort of, appeared to try to cause trouble or tried to feed the rumours, or with her behaviour quite enjoyed the intrigue. So there's that question too.
Oh, well, that's something I would happily accept. And, I think one of the things we're most proud of on our podcast is that initial interview with Valentine Lowe, which really changed my opinion about all this. I have to say, he's met these courtiers, her behavior when she was inside the tent. It was very obvious to a lot of people she was intriguing to kind of get out of it and to kind of create a cause, really. And the idea that it was a load of reactionary old bores and old white men. It wasn't. It was a very diverse group of young women and gay men who, many of whom were Australian and American, and they were totally traumatized by working for her. So,
yes,
maybe of that.
Valentine Lowe was fascinating too.
Great, isn't he?
In Courtiers, where he gave a bit of background to Harry that I think a lot of people have not noticed, but Harry was very sort of reactive to Twitter prior to meeting Meghan Markle when he was actually with Cressida. And Valentine Lowe points that out, that he used to get his office to, he would come in and say, have you seen what they've said? And he'd want people to get onto it, and he'd be extremely reactive and, just so upset and paranoid about what was happening on Twitter. So it sort of predated Meghan.
Yeah. Valentine thinks that he was basically primed and ready to explode, and Meghan produced the fuse. She read him very cleverly from the beginning, and she produced the sort of justification for something he probably always wanted to do, which is to kind of blow the whole thing up and sort of reinvent it, which I think is what they're trying to do now with the whole Nigeria.
Yeah. I think maybe there's a counter narrative to that, though, that maybe Harry was weaponizing Meghan against the royal family. So he recognized in her an effective weapon, But
I'm interested about Spare. I mean, Spare, again, was weaponized in order to stir up dissension and confusion. So that it wasn't really a straightforward autobiography. It was just another instrument in their campaign against the royal family.
Yes, indeed, and a very effective weapon, and so damning of his brother. I mean, he really tried to smear William's reputation. He tried to smear his character. He tried to make him out as an angry bully, basically, and that seems to be his aim. And it's interesting that sort of jealousy and that Spare syndrome seems to have existed
there's a lot of anger in that family, Shauna. There's a rather excellent book over your right shoulder, which I'd recommend. It's a rather good book.
I placed that deliberately. Did you notice?
I appreciate it. But,
where's my book?
One of
yours
the things...
is there. Here. Oh, is it Andrew?
Oh, Andrew, you're always hogging the limelight.
Oh, good. Shift your camera.
I sort of put one on one side. Oh, I've also got Patrick Jeffson's book. He fascinates me.
Oh, I love Patrick.
And he's a buddy of yours, isn't he?
He's a good friend of mine.
I think he's just been so misused and it's so unfair and so unjust. And I loved his book. I thought it was so honest.
You see, Patrick is somebody who would probably agree with me on the origins of Harry's anger, but he would also agree with you about Meghan being sort of manipulative and deceitful from the beginning. But in the Diana biography, one of the things I'm proudest of is we got to talk to a lot of courtiers. I don't think many of them had ever talked before or since. We were very lucky to do that. And the insight into Charles's temper, I know Charles is sick and we shouldn't speak ill of him, but the Windsor temper is a factor in all of this. I think William has it. I think Harry has it. His dad, Charles had it. And one of the many things that Diana felt about Charles, and they were contradictory as human emotions often are, but one of the many things she felt about Charles was fear. He would explode. He never hit her, but he would throw things, he would shout, and he would really get very angry about stuff. And that is in that family. And I don't think it's disrespectful to the Windsors to point it out.
And Andrew has
also, I think, do you think it's true that Charles is actually a bit frightened of Harry when he explodes, and possibly William too? I mean, but evidently when Harry exploded around the time of the Queen's death over the phone at his father, do you think that's just trying to smear Harry, or do you think that's valid?
One of the reasons Charles isn't seeing Harry at the moment is he probably thinks I'm ill. I'm receiving, some powerful drugs for a serious illness, and I can't cope with another shouting match.
Right. Yeah,
Yes, not good for my
just
blood
doesn't have
pressure.
the energy for it.
No, I
Yeah.
agree.
So is Camilla, is she someone that sort of, is it true that she jollies King Charles out of these moods and it keeps everything more even and balanced?
I think so.
Does she
Yeah.
play that role?
Yeah, I think she's the person who settles him and that he can trust. Yeah. And she's
Right.
the one
Yeah.
who's trying to rein him in at the moment from doing too much, because there's a worry that he's going to exhaust himself because of his sense of public duty.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Andrew, can
Camilla,
I ask you something about Sarah Ferguson?
Yes, of course.
Well, I'm sort of chatting about her book, Sarah, My Story, at the moment. And my impression, I'm not a Sarah fan. I've always been quite cynical and skeptical about her. But one thing that came through in her book was I think she really did love Andrew at the beginning. That's the impression I'm picking up. Did Andrew ever really love her, or was he marrying someone that he thought his mum would like?
Well, I think they were drawn to. It was very much a physical relationship. They had a very similar shared sense of humor, but they were sort of both slightly on the rebound. I mean, he hadn't been able to marry Koo Stark, I mean, though that was clearly a couple of years earlier, and hadn't been able to settle. And she had wanted to settle down with Paddy McNally, and he really wouldn't commit. And so Diana kind of pushed her into this ambit. I mean, the
Right.
stories are that no, I mean, she quite quickly realized that this wasn't for her. She was slightly pushed to it, I think, by her own family, who loved this idea of her being part of royal circles.
Yeah.
Who knows what goes on in their minds? But no, I mean, within weeks, she was regretting it. He was away. She was bored. She realized she'd made a bit of a mistake. And I think she does write about that at times. I mean, my story is a bit like Spare. Its relationship to the truth is rather limited. And so I wouldn't take that as the gospel.
Do you think your book's going to end up with Andrew being evicted from Royal Lodge finally because of what you expose?
Well, I don't think he can be evicted from Royal Lodge. I mean, he's got a lease, and as long as he keeps the terms of the lease, and he's got plenty of money, so he could do that. All the stories about him not doing it up and not being able to afford it, I think, are ridiculous. So no, I
Right.
think it's very difficult. The only way he would go is voluntarily, and he believes that he's entitled, because of his status, to a large house. He'll argue that for security reasons, it needs to be within the Windsor security net. He'll say, "I've now got grandchildren. My daughters are beginning to do royal duties, and I should have this." And he's
Right.
very good. I mean, he managed to get security for himself and his daughters really by bullying the policeman. And
Right.
so no, everything for him is about status, and the Royal Lodge is the last thing he has to preserve that.
And Phil, I wanted to ask you about the last line in your book where you said that there's hope that William would be the best of Charles and the best of Diana. And I'm just wondering, can you tell me what is the best of Charles?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the best of Charles was. Do you remember that episode of The Crown that was filmed all about the tour to Sydney, the tour to Australia in '83?
Yes.
And it was the one that was very well sourced. Patrick Jefferson, actually, you mentioned, was a consultant on that series and that episode.
Right.
And I've
Yeah.
met a lot of the people who, from both the Australian and the royal side, who have witnessed to those events. I think of all the episodes of The Crown, it's the most accurate. And it's so interesting that it's also really very balanced and fair. You see that they were in love, they did try, but
Yeah.
Camilla was always there on the end of the phone. Diana was always anxious and worried that Charles was talking to her too much. They probably
Yeah.
weren't at that stage back together physically, but pretty
Yeah.
close.
You
And I
you
think the
spoke
best
to
of Charles was the fact that after the tapes came out, everybody got very angry, and we talk about this in the book, and everything is exaggerated. But for many years, I think they did genuinely try to have a loving family, and there's a humour to Charles. But he's not, he's got temper, as I've said, but there's a humour to him. There's a sort of sweetness to him, I think, as well, that Diana really talked
Yeah.
about with her friends. So that, I think he struggled all the time with jealousy of her professionally, and obviously his attraction to Camilla. But
Right.
when he wasn't
Yeah.
succumbing to those emotions, there's more of the marriage that was good than they like to remember later, if you know what I mean. Later, when they're divorcing, as people do, they exaggerate the bad things that happen. And both
But William doesn't seem jealous of Kate, and that does seem to be very much a team. And I think he's rather proud of her.
I agree. I think William has got some of Diana's better qualities, which are that she's more open-minded. She was very she has a kind of joy and empathy in her, which Charles struggled with. That's why she had this ability to connect to people, which was real. And many people that canted Diana.
I loved your article in the Critic about Christina Lamb being won over by this hardened war reporter, and she go for Angola for the landmine walk, and she's won over by Diana, and she's prepared to be cynical and in her coverage of it, but she was won over by her professionalism, and she realized that when she was on the job, she was really sincere.
And this is in the final years of Diana's life, when many people would say she was losing a grip on reality. She's doing a few disastrous relationships. She's harassing Oliver Hoare. But when she turned it on, and she still could, she was exceptional. Something
she was.
Say. And right till the end, nobody wanted Charles. The embassies, the big British companies, they always wanted Diana because she was just good at the job.
And he was so unpopular, wasn't he? I mean, around that time, it was just like every popularity poll around that time, no one wanted him to be king. So the fact that it's turned around to this extent is extraordinary.
It is.
And Harry and Meghan's probably helped with that.
Exactly. Well, it's part of media manipulation.
The manipulation that took place, especially in the years after Diana's death, which Patrick and I covered in the series we made. That, I think, I've said this before, that really upset Harry. Rightfully so, in my opinion. Some very, very dubious things were done when she was barely cold in the ground to try and help Charles and Camilla relaunch. And I don't begrudge them that. They're obviously very happy together. She's obviously very good for him. But the knives were out. And I think Harry knows that.
Do you think Charles had any choice, though, Phil? Because really, when it comes down to it, his job is to ensure that the monarchy keeps carrying on, that it, can be handed down, that it's in a sort of a position to exist. And so even though it was clearly a campaign to rehabilitate Camilla and get that, did he have any choice? Did his duty dictate that he had to do that? He had to recover.
I think he could have achieved pretty much everything he needed to achieve without allowing some of his henchmen to spread the most poisonous and unpleasant stories about Diana. I don't think that was necessary. And
it went too far.
The whole atmosphere was so poisonous.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything that's coming down the pike for Charles that could really disrupt the monarchy? Is there any sort of skeletons in the closet, maybe Michael Fawcett, or because I read Tom Bower's book, Rebel Prince, and then it was updated to be Rebel King, I think. Just the title changed, not the contents. And there seems to be so many smoking guns all through that book. And I just wonder, are they dead and buried forever, or are they going to come back?
Andrew knows a lot about Michael Fawcett and the financial side of things, which perhaps in the long term is the more danger to Charles, actually.
Well, I mean, I think Charles, Charles, there are a lot of stories, I think, waiting to be run about Charles, particularly in Dumfries House and the various donors there, and some of the people he's metaphorically got into bed with. But I think Fawcett is a running sore. I mean, Paul Burrell, they clearly shut down with the court case. Closing, but he's clearly around, and there are always going to be people, and there's clearly Meghan and Harry without NDAs, who can leak things. So I think there must be concern that there could be some bigger things still to come out.
So you think, Phil, that really is Harry's agenda, that he's trying to draw attention to everything that's happened, and he's really trying to blow the whole thing apart?
No, I think that the fact that he's so angry about the press and the press's relationship with the palace grows out of what he saw as a teenager, and he felt he got the shabby end of it. But I think a bigger thing in recent years is the fact that whether it was himself or in collaboration with Meghan, they've dreamt up this idea that they could be they could be better. They could be kind of global celebrity statespersons, and a stateswoman in Meghan's case, without ever having to be voted for anything. But, I guess
Yeah.
neither is
If
the
he was
princess.
sincere in that, though, couldn't he have stayed there and tried to make changes from within?
Well, it's funny. I was in Australia about a year ago, talking to various of my friends, my old ABC friends, who tend to be on the left. Surprise, surprise. Tend to be Republicans. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
And they were saying, wasn't it a shame when we had the big bushfires, the really bad ones in Victoria, about 2 years or 3 years ago? Wouldn't it have been wonderful to see Harry and Meghan coming out? Harry in his high-vis thing, not slapping the backs of all the fireys. Meghan could have cuddled a koala. That's the kind of thing. And these are people who don't like the royal family. Wouldn't it have been lovely to have them? They did have potential, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, they have
Yeah.
potential.
So certainly outside the white comment.
Yeah. Yeah. But
I-
see, I think you're underestimating that there's a lot of people out there that anyone that just has had any career, any workplace experience has seen a million Megans.
Maybe
Yeah,
we're just
They can
middle-aged
see it
men
coming
who
from
fall
a
for this stuff.
mile off, Phil. They can see it coming from a mile off.
No,
And that's not racist. That's
most
just,
women
I'm
I
talking
know
about
who would share your
character. I'm
opinion.
talking about character.
Most
Yeah.
women I know would agree
Well,
with you.
I think it's very interesting your point that there she was trying to almost emulate Kate with the dress at the wedding, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And
Yes.
she's now doing that slightly with Diana, again, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. But she
Yeah.
is she is sort of trying to invest her. It's Patricia Highsmith territory in some respects.
And she's the queen of spin and the queen of leakings and briefings. I mean, when they first got together, she leaked about Catherine not giving her a lift to Whole Foods in Kensington to a gossip columnist in Canada, Lainey Gossip. And there's a photograph of Meghan sitting with Ben and Jessica Mulroney and Lainey Gossip having dinner in Canada. And then this very early leak that made Catherine look arrogant and standoffish and unfriendly and unwelcoming got to that gossip column in Canada, which had a worldwide distribution and was very, very popular. And that's when I sort of thought, it's starting. And then from that moment, it's extraordinary that Harry, who is so against leakings and briefings and, arrangements with the press, has married the queen of spin. You only have to see the PR puff pieces, just a barrage of them coming out from the USA over the last 5 years. And people forget Omid Scobie, how close Meghan was with him, and particularly in their first year in the USA, because he was royal editor for Harper's Bazaar, but he was also having a weekly spot on Good Morning America and also ABC America. And every time it was all perfect PR for Meghan and anti sort of royal rhetoric. And people sort of scoff and laugh at him now, but at that period of time, and that's the same year that Finding Freedom came out, he had enormous impact. He was getting a lot of attention in the USA. So she is very good at setting herself up. And I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that Harry has married someone that plays the same games that he despises.
Exactly. It's ironic, isn't it? And they make a big thing of privacy. But it seems to me that the press clearly is acquiesced in this. Is the American press, and because clearly it sells papers, do you think that's changing? I mean, from your overview of looking at them.
Well, there's sort of a glossy stable, which has always been very Meghan friendly. And you would expect them to be, because they run the sort of stories that would satisfy that sort of demographic, I would imagine. But I haven't seen any great turnaround yet. There was a lot in the lead up to the pylon on Catherine that didn't originate in the UK. The UK, it tends to originate with digital publications, which come from the USA. Often by Penske Media, they have a lot of digital rags, and they sort of plow out an extraordinary number of articles, sometimes 10 a day. And they'll be positive on Harry and Meghan, and they'll be negative about the royal family, whereupon they do this barrage for 2 weeks out of any event that'll hit the, X. And then the UK media sort of picks up on it maybe 2 or 3 days out of an event. But it's such a clear pattern, and it happens every time. And it's always when there's something big coming up for the royal family. I mean, the latest example is the Diana Legacy Awards, where the announcement of American Riviera Orchard, which was quite ludicrous because it doesn't exist yet. And every single article, yes, they mentioned the Diana Legacy Awards, but every single article the next day mentioned Meghan Markle's business and the rollout of American Riviera Orchard. And there was no point for her to do that because it doesn't exist yet, other than to make sure she was mentioned as part of the articles for the Diana Legacy Awards. So she's good at this. She's really, really good at this.
In terms of American politics, it'd be very interesting to see with the election coming, whether Biden pursues an endorsement, a public endorsement from Meghan. I think he probably will. I think things like Nigeria.
Oh, I don't think she's important enough anymore, Phil.
You see, I
yeah.
We talked about
it wouldn't help him. It wouldn't help him. I think Andrew's right. I think it would be a negative.
I disagree,
he'll be markled.
No, I think you're wrong. I think that we talked to a range of people. We had Clive Irving on, we had Kitty Kelly on. Both probably would agree with me that she does carry quite a bit of weight.
Still, really? Yeah. Still?
I think so.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting to see. It'd be interesting to see the effect she would have. I thought her main sort of strength as far as politics was more in the first couple of years when she was over there and she was sort of contacting people in Congress and sort of fighting for that paid parental leave bill. I thought then she probably had some political influence and she could have sort of jumped on from that. But I think now she might be considered a liability. I don't know.
Do you think
the California governor's avoiding her. So
yeah, and she's been mocked on South Park. But that doesn't necessarily mean every single potential Democratic voter dislikes her. That's what Biden would care about.
Is the best way to deal with her to ignore her? Or do you think the royal family should be, in a sense, being a little bit more Machiavellian? They should be going back to what they did with Charles?
I think they probably need to be on the front foot a little more. It seems to be that, well, I don't know. I mean, when Catherine comes back, I think a lot will change. I think there's been a vacuum that's been created. And I think Meghan sort of tried to make hay while the sun shone, particularly in Nigeria. I meant to ask you with Nigeria, your impression of Harry. Do you think he looked uncomfortable when they were sort of greeting her as Princess Meghan and things like that? Did you think he seemed like, inside he knew this was wrong, a little off?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we saw it during Netflix. And I think maybe if he was a stronger character, he would stand up to that. But he goes along with it. It became the Meghan show, nothing to do with him.
Well, he did become the Meghan show, but I don't think he's necessarily bothered about that myself. And you've heard me say I hated the Netflix series. I thought it was emotionally manipulative rubbish. But, I think when you see her in front of those 50 businesswomen and media women in Nigeria, it's what is the job of being a royal? It's about fame, about influence, a little bit of magic. There is something there. You may not like her. I know you don't. But I think Nigeria was a substantial success. And talking of a Biden endorsement, I think
it's
not
empty.
But Phil, what was
royals are about making change, about doing good, about uniting people. It's not
Phil,
about her.
Actual conference, the business conference in front of the women, where she said that she acknowledged that she was, Nigerian and thank you for welcoming me to my country. And then she went on to say that the definition of a Nigerian woman is someone who is beautiful and courageous and resilient. And don't you look at that and think, oh, come on.
I've heard sentimental guff like that from all sorts of royals. I mean,
but she was more or less saying that she was that.
Yeah. Royals are self-deprecating. They're modest.
Exactly. Yes, Andrew's hit on it. Yes.
This is a new form of it.
Well, this is her form. This is celebrity royalty. But it's not. It's celebrity.
No, that's exactly what it is. And whether it works or not, we don't know. But that's what they're trying to do.
You know what we're doing here? We've turned Scandalmongers into a Piers Morgan show.
No, No, let's not argue. We don't want to argue. We're running out of time. We realise it must be well past midnight now, wherever you are. Sorry
no,
about
it's
that.
not. But you've only got 40 minutes on your Zoom, don't you?
No, we've changed now. That's why we're called out. We use the same account, so we've melded our personalities.
It's
why
my
I'm
that's
Andrew Lowry.
good.
I know.
Oh,
we can
that's
go on.
good.
Oh, you're well worth
Yeah.
at least
No,
an
we're
hour.
very cheap and cheerful, and we need better production values, I think.
Oh no,
We can learn
no,
from
I
her.
don't think so. I think your stories are your production values because they're just fascinating. I mean, you start watching one of your episodes and you're hooked right to the end. I think it's just
But
brilliant.
what next for you? Because you've talked about us a lot, and you're our guest today. You've got a plethora. I don't know when you sleep, you seem to have about 5 sub brands.
Yes.
Are you still expanding? Are you going to take on any extra help? What's the future like for you?
Oh no, it's just me. But I think really my goal would be to get into interviewing more authors because that's what I enjoy. And that's my passion. So I would love to do that. But it's been really interesting to explore the whole Shakespearean drama of Harry and Meghan through books. I've found that to be really, really fascinating. I'm hoping that another huge scandal will come up and that I can do the same thing with. But no, I think I'll just play it by ear. But I would like to get into interviewing more. I think that's fun and interesting. And I think it will sort of expand me out into other subjects just naturally. Yeah. So I think that would be there.
Do you have a journalistic background, or are you just interested in?
No, my background's in entertainment. I was a professional singer for about 15 years, and I was in some stage shows and things like that. And so entertainment and wanting to entertain, I love being on a microphone. That skill combined with sort of book reviews and selling books and working in a little independent bookstore when I gave up singing to have babies because I couldn't travel as much as I needed to. I think I just bring those two things together and it works. So that's what I'd like to sort of double down on, I think. Yeah.
And do you have a sort of niche, do you feel, that others are not filling? That, I mean, as I think Phil said at the beginning, you're very well briefed. You allow people to talk. It's all very civilized. I mean, do you find that there aren't many podcasts that are doing that in Australia, for example?
Well, I think that probably the one thing I bring to interviews with authors will be that I've actually read the book. I think a lot of podcasts out there, and that sounds very arrogant, but really it's time, isn't it? But a lot of people don't actually read the book before they interview the author. And I make sure I really do. And I think that sort of, that excites me because you can ask sort of in-depth questions relevant to the book, which I think helps sells books. And I think that is exciting because if you have that sort of, if you're known for that when I have an author on and I interview them, I'm really going to know the material and I'm really going to dig in with them into that book. And I think authors respond to someone where they know that you've really read their book. I mean, they love it because how many interviews do you have to sit there and the person hasn't read your book and they don't even have the most basic knowledge of what you do or what you've written. And it must be incredibly frustrating because you're spending the whole interview trying to explain what the book's about because they haven't read it.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think I can bring that to it. And I think I'm hoping that when authors come on my show that they'll see a spike in sales. That would be my aim. If I could achieve that, I think it would be fun, and I'd love to do that till I was 85 or something.
Gosh, and are most of your listeners in Australia, or do you have pretty much an international?
No, mainly in the USA.
Oh, right. Gosh.
Yeah, and then second the UK, and third Australia.
Oh, that's interesting. That is interesting.
Yeah.
You get lots and lots of comments.
Well, we should do this more often because we managed to fill an hour talking about one royal tour. There's lots of things we could talk about.
I'd love to talk to you about lots of other things, and I hope that you will one at a time come on the Vintage Read Show because I really want to interview you about your trilogy of books. So I'd love to do a sort of a lead up to the new one if you could spare me the time sometime over the next year. And Andrew, I would love to interview you too on any book you wish, because, it's good practice, and, you bring a lot of cachet, you two.
Oh,
Well, that's
you
right.
bring us a lot of cachet. We're very flattered.
But
Thank you so
I would
much.
love you too, because I know all my audience would just adore you both.
Anytime.
And so it's a nice thing there. Plus, you could come on if you wanted to and talk about who you've had on Scandalmongers. I mean, we could do a thing where you could talk about because that would expand your audience, because our audiences mesh, and you could talk about, the guests you've had over the last month and a little bit of background to them and your reactions, because that would be fascinating, sort of like a behind the scenes of Scandalmongers.
Let's do it. Let's book it in.
Yeah.
Monthly.
Okay. All right.
You've got him excited now. He's going to be telling you about your
Well, it
bedroom
would be
too.
great, because I mean, it's a bit of cross promo, and if you collab, I'm pretty new to this YouTube thing, but Andrew Gold has given me a few instructions, and he says if you collab with other people, you both benefit.
I agree.
And,
we're not competing. We're all swinging the same water.
Exactly.
With slightly different perspectives sometimes. So that's great. No.
All right. Here's to more collaboration. And thanks again for a fascinating hour.
No worries at all. Thanks a lot for having me.
Lovely to talk to you.
Okay,
bye.
See you.
Well, I felt that went very well. Her interviewing us and us her. It was a sort of three-way conversation, and very engaging character, and good to have someone who's very well informed on some of the subjects. I mean, all our speakers are well informed, but on the subject of Harry and Meghan particularly.
I agree. And I think enthusiasm is a great value, isn't it, in guests and in podcasters, and she's got tons of it. Also, it's nice. I quite like disagreeing with people sometimes, you know what I mean? It's the art of civilized disagreement is a dying art. We've talked about this before. We don't have to always agree on everything. Life would be very boring if we did.
No, it's good. I mean, I think we all have slightly different takes on people, and I think you then just take what you want. It's true of our books too. I certainly try and write in a very unjudgmental way, but clearly, and I'm always struck how people take different things from the books. I mean, maybe it's the same with you.
Well, I think also people just love to know details behind the stories that they like and the writers that they like, and that's one of the reasons why Shauna's podcast has been such a huge success. And I think also some of our shows with top writers, they often don't do very well at first, I'm thinking like the Jimmy Savile one, or maybe the one on John le Carre, but they're the growers. People who come to the podcast have a sort of ferret about in the back catalogue, and they come across these and they find them. And I keep finding new comments on these old shows saying, "Oh my goodness, I never knew that. What an interesting person. Wasn't she fascinating?" I think that's actually a real service we can offer.
Yeah, yes. No, I really recommend go back over the back catalogue. There's a lot of good stuff there, and a lot of current scandals in the news are subjects we've actually often covered in the past. So it's, and we do try and provide some variety. But Shauna, I think, is going to be a regular, we hope, on the show.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Let us know what you think, how you'd like us to continue our relationship with Shauna, because we sort of thought we might do a monthly catch-up with her. Just to review what we've been doing, what she's been doing, and chew the fat about the big issues of our age. Not always Harry and Meghan, although I suspect they will feature quite prominently.
Well, it's interesting. I think a third of our listeners are in Australia. Most of her listeners are in the States. But we clearly have a very strong Australian fan base, and we'd love to do more for you, more subjects. I mean, I think
we really would. And we keep talking about Australian stories and not doing them, but we will do, and we intend to. And in fact, we met with an Australian friend for lunch the other day, didn't we, Andrew? And
we did.
She was she's somebody who organises events and speaks at events. And who knows, maybe one day we'll have a little tour. I think you'd enjoy talking to the audiences in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane. Be fun, wouldn't it?
It would be fun, yes. And then they could see us in the flesh, and we could meet our fan base.
We could. I don't advise looking on TikTok, by the way, about our fan base. I do put clips on. I put a clip of the last show. It attracted a lot of comment. I would say about 50% of them were, who are these two old white men, and why are they talking about a black woman?
Well, I think you should be able to talk about anything. We all have views.
We do. We do. And TikTok is its own special place. I think most of them are under age, actually. They're teenagers. Yeah. All right. Well, that was fun.
Yeah, it's good. And what have we got coming up next week?
We haven't chosen yet, but we really have to do Putin because we keep talking about it. So
Yeah.
my vote would be for Mr. Putin.
Yes, because actually, what have we got? We've got also Steve Davis on a scandal in Estonia. We've got Anne de Courcy, we've been discussing on Lord Curzon's daughters. And we've got the whole slaps, which is a sort of legal device used by oligarchs to suppress free speech. So maybe, comments from listeners. What would you like to see next?
All right, let us know, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Scandalmongers podcast. This has been a Podcast World production. You can get in contact with our show by emailing team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandalmongers in the heading, or via our social media links within the show's bio.